cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition. By the way, this episode is also available as a video on our YouTube channel. Just search Energypreneurs. Thank you for joining. Good afternoon, Shaheen and Pauline. So I'm in Manila. Where are you?
I'm
We're
based out
in the
of
Netherlands.
Yes, Utrecht, Netherlands. Actually, no, Pauline is in another city in the Netherlands, but at the moment, we both are in the Netherlands. And good afternoon to you too, Sohail.
Thank you. So maybe
Yeah.
you can introduce what you do, maybe Pauline first and then Shaheen.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having us on the podcast. So great to be here. So we work both actually on sustainability transitions and accelerating those transitions as sustainability consultants. And I do that in a wide range of sectors from agri-food to water, textiles, electrical devices, focusing mainly on how do we actually drive a transition forward. And one of the things that fascinates me in that aspect is many people know that sustainability is an issue, but how do you actually get them to take action? Because eventually transitions are driven by individuals and often ambitious individuals who want to make a change, and how to do that. That's what I work on every day.
Wow. What are the elements you mentioned? Sustainable transitions in food. What are the elements you look at? Because it's a new term to me.
Yeah. So the elements within the food sector, you mean?
Maybe we go, Sahil, you introduce yourself first also.
No worries. My name is Sahil Nair as well. And as we pointed out, we are based out of the Netherlands in the same company. I know Sohail because I used to work in ADB for quite some time, and we met very briefly when I was there in Manila. So good to see you again. And I specifically work within the company on sustainable sourcing and impact team, which essentially focuses on the agricultural commodities part of it. Most of our projects is supporting various different clients from NGOs to private sector to institutions, multilateral institutions on, let's say, trying to solve the complex sustainability issues within the agricultural sector. So, yeah, that's me.
I know a friend who is working with a startup who makes coffee in the Philippines. And so I heard quite a number of sustainable sourcing. How do you do this? Do you want to define, say, coffee, a product that we all relate to, right? What are the elements and what does it mean? And what are the things we need to know?
Sure. Let me give it a stab, and then Pauline, please feel free to add to it as well. But essentially, when we talk about agri-sustainability, we think about what kind of resources are required to produce any agricultural product. And those resources are essentially water, land, and the people involved, which is the farmers, and different inputs that's involved within the agricultural commodity, right? And when we talk about water, land, this land could be in spaces which carry a very strong ecological or ecosystem value, let's say a forest or any other wetland ecosystem or grassland ecosystem. And there is a global issue of conversion of those land which has high ecosystem services or provides high ecosystem services or has values into agricultural land, which traditionally provides only provisional services, which is essentially the food that we consume. So there is an issue of conversion of land and forests and things like that. There is an issue of water, which is, let's say, cash crops like coffee, for example, as we're discussing about that, may require a certain amount of water, which could be used by other communities around it, which could be used for other purposes as well. These are two examples that I can give you for that. And when we say about coffee, there is also issues with human rights, because a lot of times coffee is produced in places where the landowner is not exactly the farmer, and the farmer themselves get the least value within the high cash crop, right? And that's where we try to understand when it comes to sourcing a coffee or any commodity like coffee, where exactly does it come from? Is any land converted, which is a high ecological value for that particular commodity? How much water is used for that commodity? and issues like that. And of course, there is growing pressure within the retailers and the companies that sell the coffee. Organizations understand that, people are starting to understand that, and they start to ask questions. Okay, so what is the ecological impact of the commodity that I'm consuming? And I want to consume something that has the least economic or ecological impact. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what I can say about, let's say, any commodity.
Yeah, but I'm just intrigued that you did not mention energy, because water right now may be coming from the surface water, or you harvest rainwater, because if your energy is free, then you can go maybe mess up the whole underground water table, because you can go really deep for free. So I think that also aspect you mentioned about people, if you move them around, you need energy to move people around, you need transport. So I think, yeah, you mentioned this because I remember seeing wine being branded in Australia almost 5 years back, saying made with solar. And they had a tiny footnote saying, we got rid of everything, all our produce and everything runs on solar. So they said wine
No,
branded
that
as
is,
made with solar. So sorry, just wanted to make that point. I'm an energy guy. You cannot just see.
yes, that's interesting. Yeah, that's something that we have actually till now, at least within the commodity, that's an interesting development. I did not know about this, but it's useful to also consider how much energy is consumed within the transport and produce and storage of these
Yes,
specific
yes.
agri commodities.
Conditioning, you freezing. Without energy,
Exactly.
nothing
So
more. Definition of
exactly.
energy is uptake from A to B, right?
Yes, so that's an important aspect, which usually a lot of when we talk about agri commodity sustainability, at least from what I have worked within Europe, they haven't mentioned it, but it's a useful aspect to talk about, especially when it comes to fresh produce, right? So fresh produce transport and storage, most of the countries, like at least the countries that we are dealing with, their lack of infrastructure is because they don't have a methodology or an infrastructure or an investment to store these particular fresh produce. So that's an important element that needs to be considered, I feel, for sure. Yeah.
I'm intrigued because I organized a segment on the sideline of Asia Clean Energy Forum 2024. And one of the things about water, energy, and food nexus, because my argument was we always talked about water energy nexus, because I used to work in Central Asia, the countries, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, hold all the water they need for hydropower. But when they release that water, it needs to be the right season, because the whole cotton field in Uzbekistan relies on those water, which is held up in hydropower. And that's how the Russian designed that the downstream country, Kazakhstan, Uzbek, and Turkmen's agriculture needs are met by melting ice that are stored as a hydropower. And they won't release it during winter time. They will export the electricity with gas, so that summertime this gets released. And this is a water energy nexus. There's tons and tons of work done. I wanted to bring it to that discussion that there is maybe now water energy and agriculture nexus, because if you use technology, hydroponics and others, you can reduce the energy or water footprint of any product by 80%. But you need electricity. But if your electricity
Right.
becomes cheaper, then maybe this is a better water solution.
Out of curiosity, Sohail, when it comes to aquaponics, how scalable is it for smaller or let's say more developing countries within rural areas? Do you think it's something that could be implemented, and do you have examples of it?
Yeah, we can have a lot of discussion about this offline. We did quite a lot. We had some product, and we are also talking about a small product, which is like a size of a solar. Now saying you just modularize and you can scale up. I mean, it's very easy, even just with a top of my head, 10, 15 square meter of land. If you really optimize with the right nutrients, that's enough for a family to feed. I live in an apartment in Manila. Whole COVID time, I grew all my vegetables here. Two of my bedrooms, everything. But that's a separate discussion. But yes, technology can enable those things even in the remote rural areas. Because the plant needs basically three things: light, which you can proxy. If you have free electricity, you can generate the light and control the exact color of light at different stage of the plant needs. Then water, and nutrients. And again, nutrients, you can just target exactly what they need. You don't need to throw in and if you're growing this way, you don't need a fertilizer because you're obviously growing in a more controlled way. And even if you grow it outside, you're not spraying water and 5% reaches the root. You're giving the root exactly a few drops. So that's how you save 80% water. Anyway, we can talk and talk. Okay, Pauline, you want to have a stab at it?
Yeah, thank you, Sahil. And it's interesting that you mentioned this food, water, energy nexus. We've done some work on that as well. And what we see right now in the Netherlands, which we're a pretty small country, right? And we have actually a pretty large greenhouse horticulture sector within our agricultural sector, which you really see this nexus coming into play into that, right? Because given the context of us being such a small country, maybe you would want to say we scale up regenerative agriculture because there's a lot of good practices there, right? And there are, but there's also not enough space for each and every farmer within the Netherlands to transition to regenerative agriculture. So you also need other ways of farming. And well, in this greenhouse horticulture sector, that there is already a lot of steps being made, but I think it's a prime example of this nexus because you also need a lot of energy to actually make those greenhouses warm and have light there because, well, yeah, you mentioned that these crops need that. And of course, you need water there too. And there's already steps being taken with drip irrigation, for instance. But at the same time, it remains a huge problem where there's also not enough clean energy to actually fuel these greenhouses. Whereas that's what you would want to transition to. And it's this sort of constant trade-off between how do you actually integrate the right farming practices, especially in such a small country, but I think it translates to other countries too.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Netherlands has a lot of smart agriculture and a lot of greenhouses. But one example I really like in this context, and I was telling that to my client in Turkmenistan, which is neighboring to Afghanistan and Iran. The terrain is like a deserted area. There's nobody there. And I was telling them a similar location in South Australia where you can look up. There's a company called Sundrop Tomatoes. So what they did, they were looking at the story that I heard. A lot of empty containers goes back to Sydney from Adelaide. And then this person had an idea that those empty containers can be full of tomatoes going back. So they took the salt water from the ocean and just using solar. So you run a desalination plant, then you run a whole tomato infrastructure. And then two of the Australian supermarket, I think both Coles and Safeway, gave them a guarantee that we'll buy all your product. Once they got a product in the shelf, they went and produced these tomatoes in the middle of nowhere. All basic input is salt water and sun. So to your question earlier, Sahil, that can be done anywhere in the world, maybe not that scale, smaller scale. All you have to do, same principle, same tech, just modularize. And I think this is an area that will have a lot of interest because one, that energy will be fed through zero marginal cost. Yes, there's a capital cost to everything, but you don't have to think, oh, I have to buy oil, the price have gone down, or I have to buy a coal, those things gone. And then also I found from my hydroponics experience, sometime maybe like a lettuce, it needs a temperature a little bit cooler than what Manila is. So you can actually run a simple chiller unit, just keep the water stream 3, 4, 5 degrees cooler. It's very easy to do. Again, technology, you put incremental solar. And then I think the biggest transformation will happen when drones and self-driving cars come in. Again, zero
That's where
marginal cost.
Exactly. Yeah. There are good examples because where I come from, I generally think about the specific farmers who are growing on the ground in South America, for example, in Brazil, for soy farmers, or let's say cacao farmers in Colombia, because my thesis was in Colombia. And generally a lot of access to finance and access to infrastructure is quite minimal there. But at the same time, also access to energy is also a big problem. So in that sense, there are some solutions out there like agrovoltaics, which I have come across, but usually from my immediate view, what I see is generally it could be a very expensive solution. So to scale it up to these smaller places, do you think solutions like even aquaponics or agrovoltaics, how would that be possible? That's an open discussion, which I don't have an answer to, but I would love to pick your brain and, of course, understand what Pauline thinks about it.
Yeah, aquaponics is a bit complicated because you also have to have a fish and others and water, right? The full cycle. But
Yes.
if you just do the hydroponics side of it, technology established. But I think where the challenge is in these remote areas, people really don't think from first principle, because that's what amazes me, that I looked at many off-grid solar projects. Oh, we need X watt to feed. I said, no, but have you realized the television in the house is really 20 years old? If you get the latest television, then it will run on a 20 watt as opposed to 200 watt. If you think first principle, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to give them a television, give them a fridge and a light. That's what they need, but they don't need their old television fridge to be run. So I think if we go to the next level saying, what does plant need? Then maybe a better solution, as opposed to we already know they need this much kilowatt and we saw someone else doing agrivoltaic, let's put agrivoltaic. But I think still what is lacking, that people don't want to go back to first principle saying what works actually, what problem are we trying to solve?
And I think that also works in a larger institutional scale, right? Then that's what we also try to deal with, Pauline, as well, right?
Thank you. I love that idea. And I think way too often we're focused on indeed these small things, or maybe if we already think we have the answer, we tend to get tunnel vision on that. And I love the idea of going back to the first principle of what do we actually need, not necessarily maybe in terms of a concrete solution that we are focusing on, but in terms of, for instance, what does a plant need to grow? And thinking about maybe are there alternative solutions that could also provide the same outcome? And that's indeed what we try and do, well, both in the agriculture space as well as other sectors, right? Where we try and think about what does a transition need? What is our broader mission? And how can we align these different stakeholders to work towards that vision and do that together?
Yeah, that works everywhere, because we humans get carried away with the problem in hand. I met a friend many years ago. He's a very senior guy in Malaysian government. And we said, we'll have a coffee. And we walked through the mall. He got really mad. They don't have a good coffee. And then finally I said, I'm here to catch up. Coffee is not the important part. We already spent 20 minutes. I have a flight to catch.
Yeah.
Can we just sit down and have a glass of water? Oh, yeah, I forgot. Yeah. I said, no, I'm not here for the coffee. And we are not testing the best coffee in your mall. I'm here to catch up, and I have a plane to catch. Because we were going for one coffee place, and we are missing the plot here. So that happens in organization, in everything. We get carried away. We solve the wrong problem. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
Yeah, but it's a good story.
Tell me, what interesting projects are you working on?
Pauline has a lot of projects here.
Yeah, so currently, maybe to stay in the agriculture space for a bit, we're actually working on setting up a coalition. So bringing together a few of the large banks within the Netherlands, supermarkets, producers, but also the farming organizations and corporations, to set up a coalition around a shared framework for what do we actually mean by sustainability? So what are shared KPIs? And on an outcome level, so not necessarily practice level, but really on an outcome level, to agree on that within the sector. And then also create a shared framework for how do we then actually value those outcomes? So if on those KPIs you score high, how do we value that? Well, for instance, it could be in terms of the price that's paid or in other financial means. So not necessarily through the chain, but also, for instance, from the government or from banks, some sort of financial reward, or in other ways than financially. But putting at least some sort of value to that, so that parties are able to then also quantify a reward for that. And that's an exciting process. So we're in the process of bringing all these stakeholders together, because what I believe is often and I'm talking about different transitions here, but also in the agriculture space, what's often missing is a um, type of coordination. And what we see now, for instance, is that there are loads of different criteria that individual companies set up or individual banks set up, or goals that are set by the government, but they don't align, right? So, for instance, we now have CSRD, which urges financial institutions and large companies to report against certain sustainability criteria. But at the same time, the Dutch government has their own goals. Supermarkets may have their own goals. And it's becoming a bit of a reporting Valhalla. Whereas if you at least align on what do we mean by sustainability criteria, which KPIs are there, then you can still set different goals for how do you want to perform against those KPIs, but at least we speak the same language in a way. And that's what we're trying to do right now.
So are these mostly driven top down, like a government saying, we need this, or going bottom up, consumers saying, I'll buy the product, I'll buy coffee A as opposed to coffee B because they are more sustainable?
Yeah, great question. So in this case, we're mostly looking at the back end of it. So not necessarily what's, let's say, the front end, what's communicated towards consumers. The idea is that still companies and supermarkets are able to communicate in their own way towards consumers. And for instance, company A might still say, our biggest focus or our biggest goal is reducing CO2 emissions at farm level and throughout the chain. And company B might say, our biggest focus is water and animal welfare. I'm just naming examples, right? So that's up to the companies, and then also up to consumers. What do you want to focus on when you buy something? But the idea of what we're doing right now is, at least at the back end, have the same definition of what does it mean, for instance, for CO2 emission reduction? How do we measure that so that you can actually then compare? So I guess in that sense, you could say it's a bit more top down, or at least not driven by consumer choices. But we also involve the representatives of farmer organizations, which will bring that bottom up, but from the farmer perspective, not necessarily the consumer perspective.
Yeah, but all being done in a way because consumer may not be fully aware. So I guess the producers, supermarkets, and everyone trying to differentiate their product and using sustainability as a lever, right? So how they package, how they sell, that might come later on. But it's a sort of lever saying, I'm different. It's using as a competitive advantage tool, maybe, no?
Yeah, definitely. And we don't want to take that competitive advantage completely away, because I personally also believe that's a large driver of sustainability transitions, at least for companies to do. I do actually believe a lot of people have high ambitions, but at the same time, there must be a value case for it somehow. So we don't want to take that competitive advantage completely away, but we do want to take away the confusion around how do we then measure it. And if you can't compare different organizations or different products, then it's going to be very difficult. And consumers may actually also lose trust in that competitive advantage, right? And see it more as greenwashing than something that's actually true.
I mean, once you have all those KPIs definition in place, I'm sure there is a huge advantage in taking it to somewhere else in a different country, different context, because Netherlands may be very far advanced, because someone else who hasn't thought through, suddenly this work where you're trying to definition can just take it to somewhere, it becomes a pseudo standard for them to adopt like that. Wow, amazing.
Yeah, definitely. And we're trying to align as much as possible as well with European legislation. So at least within the European context, hopefully it will be suitable to scale. And then we'll perhaps later on to outside of Europe too.
Because one thing I personally believe like the way we pick up our food now, correct or not, you can tell that many milligram of sugar per serve, right? If you can do that, you should be able to say X tons of CO2 per tons of
Right.
product. It's not there yet, definition not. People will argue until the cows come home. How do you do? But at least some number, right? Some number that would be useful. Then people can differentiate saying, oh no, I'll pay that extra X to get this because.
Yeah. And it's a kind of a positive, if I may add, sorry,
Sure,
it's
sure, go
a
ahead,
kind
go
of
ahead.
a positive development from the market side as well, because what I feel that now companies, some of them at least are becoming serious in that sense that, okay, they want to actually know how much is a specific CO2 contribution, or how much does one product or something that I'm creating, how much does that actually contribute to a certain problem? And only after that can they make any decisions on how to improve their operations and supply chain. So in that sense, it's good to have that discussion in a multi-stakeholder fashion and different industries to align on these things, and just to make sure that the claims that they're making is not only greenwashed, as he pointed out, but also they want to know if they're moving in what levers can they actually press to move in the right direction. I think it's an important exercise that things are shaping up like that. At least within Europe, I have seen the difference, which is not exactly the same in other countries. But from what I see is it can be a little bit annoying that so many people are focusing on what is exactly the KPI, what is the definition of things. But it can get frustrating, at least from me, that I come from a different geography also, where people just do and then figure out things later. But I think it's a useful exercise to have, even though it will take longer time, but it's done in a way that there are certain standards set on how to do it properly.
Wow. So this is lot of work.
Yes, indeed. Because I think the work that Pauline is mentioning is also having so many different stakeholders in place. But it's good that financial institutions are also involved there because they're quite important there.
Yeah, I think my daughter, she works in London. She's also in sustainability. Many years ago, she was saying about sustainability of, I forgot, I think the lipstick or the perfume, one of those brand. And I didn't understand. He said one of our friend working, and then you have no idea the value chain. Once she was telling me, I said, okay, enough. Now I appreciate some of it is actually a lot. Same with
Yeah.
any clothing brand, when you really go to the back,
Yeah.
boom, huge.
And environmental side is one, and there is also a social element to it, which is something that people are focusing on quite a lot over here as well. Where, for example, when we talk about cosmetics, there are so many different elements involved. Like mica is one of an important, which is a project that's coming up that we are doing from the Responsible Mica Initiative. And the mining of mica happens in very terrible conditions, which people recognize it throughout the value chain. Also, for example, even for that matter, cacao. Yeah. So the cacao in Ivory Coast, they say there are so many children working within, there's a lot of child labor, and similar to that in mica. So a lot of different industries have similar social issues along with environmental issues, which is something that we're also trying to deal with in developing mechanisms for that.
Yeah, I think also have to be up to date because the data change. Last week, I had a guest here who was arguing about the cobalt in electric cars. I said, yes, it is there, but LFP batteries, the lithium phosphate, no cobalt. It has changed, right? So if you look forward, most of the Teslas, BYDs now, they have less and less cobalt. It is in the nickel metal hydride batteries. A lot of hybrids have. So you have to keep on updating your information as well because the world is moving so fast.
Yeah. No, but in general, a lot of these rare earth materials or minerals that do come, and it's not only with the specific minerals, but also with, I'm mentioning an example of cacao, right? So the people within the bottom of the value chain, there is a certain level of exploitation that happens. And there are some mechanisms, or there needs to be something called a chain of custody and an understanding of how where does it actually come from and what are the practices. It's not only the environmental issues, which is something that there are certain legislations. I don't know if you've heard about the deforestation regulation and different aspects of it. But my personal opinion is it's a bit of a chaos, but at least people start thinking in the right direction on where is every single specific thing that I'm using, where exactly is it coming from, and is it produced in ecologically, environmentally, and socially sustainable way?
I think maybe ultimately should be able to track anything.
Which is another issue altogether. But there are challenges. I can give an example of a project that I'm working in, which is with a certification organization that certifies feed produce. And most of the feed, of course, come from soy and palm oil. The soy comes from places that face a lot of challenges with deforestation and issues related to conversion of land, right? So it could be Brazil, it could be North America, it could be different parts of South America and India, for example. There are challenges with understanding the chain of custody of the supply chain and also understanding what kind of investments are needed within different level of supply chain to even make that transition. So a lot of problems we don't have an answer to, but at least I feel that people are asking the right questions and taking it seriously within the market.
You mentioned chain of custody. Do you want to define that term? Because this is your industry.
Yes, there are many definitions, but essentially is understanding in its bare bones. I feel it's understanding from what point of the chain that specific commodity is being moved. So it can be transformed into multiple different levels and in multiple points of chain. And in understanding on who is the actors within that chain and how it's being processed.
English. Okay, make it simple. Everybody understand. You are an industry expert. Coffee. I'm drinking a coffee. How do we move all the way upstream? Or you start from upstream to downstream?
I could maybe mention a bit more on cacao because that's
Yeah,
where
sure.
I have a bit more experience in. But for example, let's say a chocolate bar comes from multiple ingredients. One of them is, of course, dry cacao seeds, right? Or the cacao itself. Now, the cacao itself, it comes to a place where the value is generated, which is generally within Europe or big cacao companies that produce that particular chocolate. But the raw cacao, dry cacao, comes from places like Colombia, Brazil, Ivory Coast, and all these places. And that is generated by a specific trader. There is a trader that's involved, which imports and exports cacao. There are multiple traders. There are big traders, like one of the biggest traders is Cargill, for example. So they just essentially deal with trading. And that trader aggregates all this cacao, but it comes from another silo or within a specific country of origin, there is a go down or somewhere where it's stored. So when the cacao is stored in that specific go down, and that comes from a specific transport company or a company that transports that cacao. So it could be multiple forms of transportation, but let's say it ends with a truck of cacao that comes in that go down. That truck is also from an aggregator, which is closer to places where cacao is being produced, but not exactly there. And that aggregator means there are different modes of form. A farmer and how cacao comes to the aggregator is generally through somebody who's a middleman or somebody who also not because cacao can be wet and it can be dry cacao. And dry is essentially the process of putting it on a blanket and sun drying the cacao. And there are different values for it. If a farmer says dry cacao, it has a little bit of higher value, but of course the weight of that cacao produced reduces and things like that. And those cacao is being also come by very high altitude locations generally, and the transportation happens in a bike. And that bike, behind that bike, somebody goes up and down a certain hill or a mountain, and then it brings that cacao to that particular location, and which also comes from a farm somewhere. So that's a smallholder. I'm talking about a smallholder, but larger farms have their own tie-ups with bigger transportation companies. And that chain of cacao itself is not only the chain of the commodity, but also chain of data of sustainability. So that is also something that needs to be collected. Things like geolocation, that's important. Things like, I can just go on and on, but this is an idea.
Have to be very concerned. Bite a piece of chocolate, no? Okay, go on.
Yes.
And you do see, I think, from Sahil's story, how complicated it is also for these large companies like Cargill and the producers they're selling to then know exactly where your cacao or your coffee comes from. and whether, for instance, any deforestation has taken place, like now under EUDR regulations, you have a responsibility as a company to ensure that doesn't happen. But if you don't even know who those smallholder farmers are within your own chain, then it's going to be very difficult to say, I'm sure no deforestation happened, or I'm sure no child labor happened. And that's what, like you mentioned, Sahil, the same chain of where does your product come from is also your sustainability data chain. And a lot of people are now working very hard to improve that knowledge within their own company.
I'm just thinking, again, coming back to first principle, because you know what Amazon has done or internet has done, like a producer has a Amazon store and directly selling globally. Technology enables us. And there, a lot of transformation has happened. In this cacao context, there is no reason a European sort of aggregator, lack of a better word, cannot send thousands of electric charged drones and collect directly from the producer, small producer. We have the technology. We may not
Yeah.
have because the regulation allowing them to fly, blah, blah, blah. But I'm saying the technology is there now.
Yeah.
So you can send a swarm of bees. They can go there, collect and fill up directly, cutting out all the middle people in between. How it happens, but technology is there. So that's something very interesting because every time somebody bypasses something, you have to recalculate your calculation in terms of the custody that you mentioned, right? Because there will be, I'm sure, someone will start bypassing with the self-driving cars and this thing. You can send cars in dangerous places where you could not have thought of going. If there's no driver, you can send something or fly a drone out. I don't know. I'm just thinking that there could be a lot of interesting and fun changes to these
Yeah.
industries as well.
And within those changes, there are a lot of people who get affected by it as well. And that's where the transitions principle come in, and aspects of that comes within Pauline's work, where there are different stages of transition and how people are getting affected. There is aggregation, different parts. For example, within the context of UDR, one of the consequences will be smallholder farmers, I feel, that's my personal opinion, will be affected a lot because they do not have the resources and means to provide this kind of data and information. Buyers will naturally shift towards bigger players who have that resources to provide that kind of data and information and deploy this kind of technology. As you already pointed out, the technology does exist. It's a matter of how much resources and the economics of it, who bears the cost. And yeah, there are challenges like that.
You're in a fun industry. Okay, what else you do for fun? Pauline, you say something. What do you do for other than work? You guys are too much into transforming everything.
Yeah, thanks. Outside of work, I play tennis. That's a big hobby of mine, which I love to do. And I'm happy it's now the summer season over here. So we have a few competitions and tournaments going on. Yeah, that's a lot of fun.
Oh, you play? That's good because racket sport is considered one of the best thing for
I
longevity.
think so, because it aims both cardio and coordination, and I think a bunch of other things. All I know is it's a lot of fun and a good workout.
Yes, absolutely. What about
It's
Shahid?
difficult. Yeah, so for
Definitely.
me, I'm very much into climbing. I like to do bouldering, that is places, indoor climbing essentially. And recently I got into salsa and bachata, so I'm taking classes for that. And I also got into something called partner acrobatics, which is you try to learn you basically lift people. And
Land or
there
in
is
the water?
no, it's on land. Like, I could be in water also, but
Yeah, because water,
but
the
yeah,
gravity will be less.
there is a base and there is a flyer. So somebody who's generally like, I'm a base, so like I try to learn different tricks on how to do that.
Wow. Wow.
What about you? Yeah.
Now, I do a lot of photography. The crazy thing that I started doing 10 years back, I should do a bit more. I used to do rollerblading as a child. So I gone back to there when I was 55 and scared everybody out. So now sometime I turn up with the skates at a 63-year-old and I have not fallen and I can see people taking bets. Oh, he's going to fall. He's going to fall. So I get a lot of kick out of it. Yeah, I do that. I do photography. I do drive now. always driven for no reason. Now I have a free electricity, so I have a Tesla in Manila. So I'm doing quite a bit of unnecessary driving.
Good. Good place to drive also. And I think maybe Pauline, you should definitely, before you go to Australia, and get some recommendations.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I know Sydney has amazing places to go. My God. Yeah. So Sydney, inside, outside, amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you want to share?
I think it's nice to connect back again, and I really wish you keep going. It's a good thing to do that you're trying to connect people and the knowledge that you have and you're sharing with so many people. And I'm pretty sure it sparks a lot of different ideas as well. So hopefully you can also use those ideas within the projects that you want to do. So good to see you, Sohail, after a long time, and all the best for this.
Yeah. Thank you. Pauline, you want to say?
Yeah, I agree. Very nice to meet you today. Nice to have this conversation. Time has flown by, actually, I feel like. And I agree with Sahil. It's great that you're doing this and having these conversations with people and sharing them with the world. So I would say keep up that great work. And I'd love to meet up in Sydney sometime.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is an idea came from one of the podcast guests. She suggested, which I'll do now. She said, establish a community of your podcast guests. So you can do a lunch, say, Sydney lunch of all the people that I had as guests. So create a mini network. So I just started on LinkedIn, establish a separate group. So it could be a subset of people. You can bounce off ideas and people can bounce off ideas among each other as well. So I'll do that.
That's a great idea.
Wow, that's great to create a community of like-minded people.
Yes. Make sure they have the right coffee when the Malaysian guest comes.
Absolutely. I'm from Melbourne. So Melbourne is very coffee place in the world. And Sydney is also, but Melbourne definitely is. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. If you enjoyed this, don't forget the full video is on YouTube. Just search Energypreneurs. Thank you. See you next time.